Far away in a foreign land, under the weight of unspoken promises and the silence of distance, CEO James stood at a crossroads. He was a young man carrying the burden of his father's empire and the ache of a heart that longed for home. What was he truly doing abroad? Was it merely business? Or was it an exile of duty, keeping him apart from the woman whose love was the anchor of his restless soul? The question haunted him. Would fate still grant him a chance to return to Vietnam, to the waiting heart of Too Deep, the girl whose patience was as deep as her name, and whose faith refused to waver? The urge of missing burned quietly within him. But the greater question lingered. Would James dare to risk it all, his father's expectations, the company's future, and the life of power being laid out before him, just to return to the girl he loved? Storms abroad, silence within. The rain had just ceased its relentless patter on the vast construction site abroad. Puddles mirrored the gray skies, and the scent of wet concrete lingered. Machines roared back into rhythm, iron arms rising and falling like the heartbeat of industry. Workers moved in flawless unison, their tasks rehearsed and efficient. James stood in silence, his sharp suit damp with mist. To any outsider, he was a figure of calm authority. But within, he carried a storm heavier than the skies above. His father's voice echoed beside him, firm yet cautious. "James, the teams are working well again." "Perhaps you should stay longer, just to be certain." James nodded, though his heart was elsewhere. He had been here for weeks, oceans away from Vietnam, oceans away from Too Deep. Each passing night stretched into an eternity. He wondered if distance could fracture the bond they had once sworn to protect. All he wanted was to return, to see her gentle smile, to hold her hand in the quiet simplicity of her countryside home. Yet his father needed him. The company needed him, and duty, like an iron chain, fastened his steps in place. Alone in his room, he whispered into the silence, "If I stay too long, will she still wait? Or will I return to find her gone?" With every sunrise, his fear of losing her only grew. Too deep. A life of waiting and quiet strength. Meanwhile, in Vietnam, Too Deep's days unfolded with a rhythm of simple beauty. She rose early, tended to her garden, and carried baskets of melons to the market, even under the sudden drizzle of summer rains. One afternoon, she found a small child standing alone on the roadside. The girl was 3 years old, her eyes filled with fear and innocence. Her name was Nay. Authorities had not yet found her parents, and they asked Too Deep to care for her for a few days. With a heart open as the fields she tilled, Too Deep welcomed Nay as her own. She cooked for her, taught her little songs, and held her through the lonely nights. The child became a tender distraction from the ache of missing James. Yet every evening, as the village settled into quiet, Too Deep sat by the window, gazing at the horizon. I hope his work is safe. I hope he comes back soon, she whispered to herself. When her elderly neighbor teased, "Are you missing your man again, Too Deep?" she blushed, but her answer was unwavering. Yes, I miss him every day. He is kind. He loves me. And without him, the house feels empty. Her heart remained loyal, stretched across oceans, bound not by presence but by trust. Fire that duty cannot extinguish. Back abroad, James felt the fire of longing intensify. He had stabilized the company, trained the workers, and silenced the chaos. Yet no achievement filled the hollowness inside him. Each evening, his father reviewed reports and spoke of expansion, but James's mind drifted to the narrow roads of Vietnam, the small market stalls, the sound of Too Deep's laughter as soft as morning rain. One late night, James stood on the balcony of his apartment, the cold city lights stretching endlessly below. They glittered like diamonds, yet none carried warmth. He unlocked his phone and stared at her picture, her smile, her eyes, her quiet strength. For the first time, he allowed the forbidden thought to surface. What if I gave it all up? The company, the expectations. Would I finally be free to love her without these chains? Waiting, tested. In Vietnam, Too Deep's days grew heavier, though she bore them with grace. She walked to market with little Nay, who often asked in her innocent voice, "See Dyke, when will your James come back? Do you miss him?" Too Deep bent down, holding the child's hand. "Yes, I miss him very much. But he will come back." "We must be patient." Her voice was steady, but when they looked away, Too Deep's eyes betrayed the longing she could not put into words. Even her neighbors asked, "Aren't you tired of waiting? Life is long. Love is fragile." What if James never returns? Too Deep only smiled faintly, raindrops sliding down her hair. If love is true, waiting is not a burden. It is proof. Her words were simple, but her heart ached with doubt. Did James think of her as often as she thought of him? The breaking point. One evening, James called her for the first time in days. When her trembling voice came through the speaker, his chest tightened. "Deep," he said, his voice breaking. "Every day without you feels like I am losing a piece of myself. I don't know how much longer I can stay here." On the other end, Too Deep's eyes filled with tears. Yet she smiled so that he would hear only strength. "James, I told you before, I will wait. Do not let fear destroy what we believe in." "Do what you must, and when the time is right, come back to me." Her words pierced him like lightning. Returning was no longer about abandoning duties, it was about choosing the life he truly wanted. Defying his father, days later, James sat across from his father at dinner. The old man spoke proudly of expansion and new markets. James listened silently before finally saying, "Father, the company is strong again." "You don't need me here anymore," his father frowned. "Do you think it's that easy? If you leave now, what will people say? That you were weak? That you abandoned responsibility for a woman?" The words cut deep, but James lifted his gaze with resolve. "If loving her is weakness, then I choose it." Because without her, all of this, every contract, every deal, means nothing. The old man fell silent. The clinking of cutlery was the only sound in the room. Then, with a weary sigh, he whispered, "If this is your choice, James, you must be ready to face the consequences." That night, James booked his ticket. For the first time in months, he felt a rush of freedom. He messaged Too Deep, "Wait for me. I'm coming home." Homecoming. On the porch of her small house, Too Deep sat with little Nay asleep in her lap. Fireflies glowed across the fields. Crickets filled the night. When her phone buzzed, she opened the message. Her hands trembled. Tears slid down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from relief. "He is coming back," she whispered. Days later, James stepped off the plane. The humid Vietnamese air wrapped around him like a long-lost embrace. Every road, every rice field reminded him of the woman who had kept his heart alive through distance. At last, there she was, standing at the gate, the little girl by her side, eyes shining in the late afternoon sun. She did not rush forward. She simply waited, tears glistening, as if to say, "I told you I would be here." James dropped his bags and walked quickly to her, his hands trembling as they found hers. "Deep," he breathed, his voice breaking. "I'm home." Through her tears, she smiled and whispered the words he had longed for. "Welcome back, James." I waited. The oceans between them, the months of silence, the sacrifices and doubts, all vanished in that single moment. The lesson of their love. Their reunion was not the end of the story, but the beginning of another test. Would the world allow them peace, or would ambition and duty return to divide them? Yet one truth stood firm. Love is not measured by presence alone. It is measured by faith, patience, and the courage to choose the heart over the world. James had faced the weight of duty, his father's expectations, and the glitter of success. But all of it meant nothing without Too Deep. She, in turn, showed the quiet strength of patience, the proof that true love endures even in absence. Together, they remind us, sometimes the greatest courage is not in building empires but in daring to follow the call of the heart. Love that is patient, loyal, and brave can overcome distance, time, and fear. It demands sacrifice, yes. But in return, it gives meaning to everything else.